Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Billy Wolfe by Kevin A. Lyons, narrated by Otis Jiry. They said it was 2/10 of a mile west of mile marker 28, and there it was. I pulled off the highway in front of it, turned on my yellow strobes, and pushed open the door. Pulled on my gloves as I walked around the truck. It stared at me with waxy eyes. Its tongue was clenched tightly between its teeth, and its broken legs were pointing in 4 different directions. The 7 other dead deer in the truck stared blankly as I picked it up by one rear leg and an ear and pushed it into the tailgate with my knee. Back in the cab, I pulled off my gloves and filled out my mortality report. 1 dead deer reported by state police at Netcong, I-80 westbound on shoulder, mile marker 27.8. Doe, adult, vehicle accident. This one closed me out for the day. I started the pickup's engine, pulled out onto the road again, and drove into the sunset. I was hoping to get to the Delaware deadstock rendering plant before dark. The old truck struggled up the hills, and its springs sagged under the weight of the carcasses. As I passed the next entrance ramp, I noticed a car parked in the median strip. It was a dark brown 4-door late-model Plymouth with black-wall tires and 3 radio aerials. Once you get the hang of it, the unmarked police cars are just as easy to spot as the marked ones. I noticed an unmarked car at each of the next 4 entrance ramps I passed. There were 2 marked cruisers, white with Jersey Trooper door patches, parked at the off-ramp to the scenic overlook. I parked the truck ahead of them, far enough downwind to keep the air from turning sour. An old cop, heavy-set with gray hair, sat on the first car's fender. A thin young cop with sideburns and a mustache was talking to him. The young one took in my long hair and beard, old flannel shirt with no sleeves, and my blood-black boots and the knife strapped on my thigh. He left without a word as soon as I got there. Cops, I like that. The young ones are out to clean up the world, and most of them would like to start with me. Old cops have had a chance to mellow out, if the low-paying bad press hasn't turned them bitter. This old cop had seen me before. He didn't know my name, just that I was the guy from Fish and Game who picked up the road-killed deer. He waved at me and smiled. "Good evening." "Yeah," I answered. "Evening." "It's getting late. You still out looking for deer?" "No, I got the last one 10 minutes ago. I'm on my way home now." Soon, as I dropped these carcasses off and hosed down the truck, the old cop nodded. I waited, but he didn't say anything else. Finally, I said, "I noticed a few of your cars on the highway, stopped at the feeder lanes. Something going on?" The old cop shrugged. "No secret, I guess. We're trying to catch a biker who rides this stretch of highway some nights. He's an outlaw type. Wears a lot of leather, and his bike's one of those real long choppers. We want him for speeding, reckless driving, evading arrest, the works." "You think he'll be riding tonight?" "Tonight's the full moon. He's been making this round at midnight under the full moon for the last 4 months." "Since March?" I asked. "It's a little early for a bike, isn't it?" Cop nodded. "And you still don't even know who he is?" "Oh, we know who he is. Kid named Billy Wolfe. Up until the first week in March, he was renting a room in Dover, and then he skipped out. He didn't take any of his clothes, his television, or his stereo, and he didn't pay his rent, his electric bill, or his phone bill. That's about par for his kind." The cop shrugged again. "Anyway, that's when he started making these runs." "It's a long way till midnight, isn't it?" "Not really. They're beginning to gather already. Some kids were sitting on the slope under the overlook parking lot. Mind if I come back and watch?" "I wouldn't encourage it, but I can't stop you." "Thanks," I said, turning to walk back to my truck. "Get here early if you want to park in the lot," the cop called. "We're not letting anyone park on the highway." I got to the rendering plant late and wound up unloading my truck under the spotlights. It's awkward trying to stuff a full-grown deer into a 55-gallon drum while you're tripping over slimy things in the shadows. I got them off, though, and into the freezer. It was only 10 o'clock when I got back to the scenic overlook, but already the lot was more than half full of motorcycles. There were biker types all over the hillside watching the road and waiting. I took in the scene, too. I never noticed before how pretty a concrete highway looks in the moonlight. At exactly midnight, the police band scanner in my truck locked onto a signal. "He's heading up the hill to Denville. Who's supposed to be watching at Mountain Lakes? He's never passed us here. Block him off at Denville. I don't want him to get past Denville." The scanner was quiet for a few moments. "He's passing me at Rockaway. Where the hell was that roadblock? He never passed us. He never passed us." After a few minutes, I saw a single headlight in the east, moving fast and followed closely by 4 police cars. Their lights were flashing and the sirens were screaming, but the bike kept going. I saw him clearly as he passed below me. The bike was painted metallic blue and green, blended together in swirls. The chrome trim, sissy bar, and extended front end sparkled in the moonlight. The rider was wearing silver-studded black leather. The 2 cruisers moved out to cut him off. I'm not sure how he did it, but he got past them. He disappeared over the hills in the west, followed by 4 red and blue flashbars. I followed the rest of the chase on the scanner. Somewhere between the Water Gap exit and the toll bridge, a distance of less than a mile, and bordered on one side by the Delaware River, the cops lost him. Billy Wolfe got away again. The bucks got the hell knocked out of them in November and December. That's their mating season, and they're always on the move. For a while, I was running more than 25 deer a day just in my 5-mile territory. By January, all that was over. The weather had turned colder, and the first snow had fallen, and most of the deer were bedded down. I was down to 4 or 5 calls a day. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon and already getting dark when I heard a local cop calling his headquarters over my scanner. He said that some woman had clipped a deer on Route 206 just north of Chester by the woods at Black River Bridge. I was in Long Valley at the time. I found a public phone at the bar, called the Chester cops, and told them I'd be up to check the deer out in 20 minutes. The cop was gone when I got there. It was just as well. Townies can be unbearable. The deer was huddled in some high grass, watching me, still alive. Sometimes, if the animal's lucky, it's only dazed by the car. There were pieces of the car's grill and broken headlights in the snow. As I neared the deer, it staggered to its feet and hobbled away. Its right rear leg flapped uselessly in the air, broken near the hip. I remember swearing. It was never going to live with a leg like that. If starvation didn't kill it, somebody's pet dog would. I considered just driving away, but I couldn't leave a cripple to suffer. The state won't let me carry a handgun, but I keep a lever-action .30-30 behind the seat. I fetched it and followed the deer into the woods. It had run down the abandoned railroad path, leaving flecks of blood in the snow. After walking almost 15 minutes, I saw it lying in the snow, head up, eyes catching the sunset. I shouldered my rifle and chambered around. I don't use a scope, just open iron sights. But I don't miss often, and I did not miss this time. The deer flopped backward, kicked twice, then went limp. I stepped toward it and stopped. My nose wrinkled. I've been doing this job for 3 years, long enough to know death when I smell it, and I smelled the musty scent of old death out of place in the clean winter air. I followed it through some dense brush at the side of the path and stopped at the edge of a small clearing. In the clearing was a shack made of plywood and tar paper, and next to it, caught in a slanting ray of orange light, was a motorcycle, a chopper. The chopper, the one I'd seen that summer night, all blue, green, and chrome under the full moon. It had to be Billy Wolfe's chopper. I wondered. Was this his hideout between moonlight runs? The snow muffled the sound of my footsteps as I approached. Something was wrong. The bike's tires were flat, and the chrome was speckled with rust, as if cinnamon or brown sugar had been sprinkled over it. That Harley had been left out in the weather for too long a time. All covering was gone from door and windows in the shack, and something made me hesitant about entering the place. The smell of death was strong. I finally looked in through an empty window frame. The interior would have been dark even if the sun hadn't been setting, but I could still see a body in the room. It was sitting in an old chair, wearing high boots, patched blue jeans, and a black leather jacket. The skin of its face had shrunken tight against its skull, and its mouth and eye sockets were wide open, as though death had caught it by surprise. The seated corpse was ankle-deep in last fall's leaves. Dead almost a year, I decided. He had to have died in late winter or early spring. If he'd died in the summer, the maggots would have picked the bones clean in a week. I walked around the corner to another window. The back of the jacket carried a flaming skull and crossbones, and the name Billy Wolfe. If he'd been dead a year, then he'd been dead long before I saw him ride under the moonlight last July. But I had seen him ride. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. I left him there, undisturbed. I glanced back at his bike from the edge of the clearing. Every man should have a marker at the end of his life. When I die, I'll probably just get a square stone. The next full moon was 3 weeks later, and on the first Friday in February. It was snowing when I got to the scenic overlook, 4 inches on the ground and still coming down. The lot was almost empty. The guy in the van next to me rolled down his window and tapped on mine. "You waiting for him, Billy?" I nodded. "A lot of people don't think he'll show tonight on account of the snow." "He'll be here," I said. I rolled my window back up and wiped the frost off my windshield. At midnight, the snowy stillness was broken by the roar of a distant motorcycle and the wailing siren of a police car in pursuit. It didn't surprise me at all.
It was cold for a Halloween night. Nipple-achingly cold, in fact. Mason let out a whine of distress, prompting me to lower the lid to the stroller to see what was the matter. His cowboy hat had fallen into his eyes for what seemed like the 100th time. It was mostly my fault. He'd have been much happier to throw the damn thing on the ground, squealing with joy at the bump of the wheels as I ran it over. But this was my last baby's first Halloween in a new town, and I selfishly wanted his costume to remain as cohesive as possible. It would have been helpful if his dad, Michael, was able to join us tonight. However, my husband was stuck on a late shift at work and wouldn't be able to join us until much later. And if Mason grew fussy or got tired early, he may not be able to join in the trick-or-treating fun at all. I know it's not his fault, and I don't blame him for having to miss out due to work. I won't deny it would be easier, though. Someone to help carry the candy, someone to help check on Mason, someone to alternate walking him up to doors with. Besides, our 2 older children had grown and moved out, meaning we had spent many a Halloween evening together holding the sticky hands of our children in their earlier years. To Michael, this night was the same as all of the others we'd celebrated through the years. but to me it was different. Mason was our last child, a miracle in the truest sense of the word. We brought our first daughter into the world when I was just 19 years old. Her sister arrived just 3 years later. We thought we were done having children until our little boy showed up. Despite the consequences of starting over at our age, going from high school diplomas back to diapers, I have no regrets. Mason captured my heart and soul the second I saw him. And ashamedly, even after giving birth to the most beautiful, healthy baby girls, I felt a love for him that I can honestly say I'd never experienced before. It was as if I had gained access to a piece of my heart that had been locked away before, dormant in shadow. My spine tingled with anxiety as I found a parking spot on the grass and pulled into it. There were already throngs of people. Some were walking with their children, some were in cars driving their kids from home to home, and the kids too old for trick-or-treating zoomed up and down the road on four-wheelers. I sighed in relief, remembering Michael had thought ahead to pack the stroller. Mason was old enough to walk, but we figured it wouldn't hurt to wheel him to a few houses here and there to avoid him getting overtired. Plus, the bottom of that thing is perfect for stashing waters, snacks, and all sorts of other things we may need along the way. Mason was already fidgeting with the restraints of his car seat, his pudgy fingers fumbling desperately with the chest clip to free himself. I chuckled, reminding him that he didn't have much longer to go. I cheerfully asked if he was excited for candy, knowing candy for him meant candy for me. Don't act like you haven't done it a time or two, especially during the toddler years. Michael and I had a tradition that was 20-some years strong and growing. We would take the kids trick-or-treating until we were all too tired to continue, with me usually being the last one to say, "Oh, come on, don't tell me you're tired already." Then we would stop at a gas station for cold drinks. Upon arriving home, we would put the kids to bed, telling them we would be searching their candy for tricks and suspicious-looking candy. We never found anything bad, but it was always more fun to look. In the morning, their dad would admit to taking a few pieces for ourselves, calling it paying the parent tax. Michael and I would sit down on our bed, turn a scary show on, smoke some weed, and take our pick of the treats. We were able to do this guilt-free for the first 5 years or so of the kids' lives. Then, as they grew older, the parent tax became smaller, and we would just buy candy of our own. Unfortunately for us, it seemed like everyone in town had chosen to travel the exact same route that we did. I could barely walk 20 feet without someone bumping into me or hitting someone's ankles with the front of the stroller. Kids were zooming by, yelling and screaming due to the sugar inducement and excitement of the holiday. I traveled with the pack, so to speak, for the first few streets, sighing in relief as I saw the final road diverge into 2 separate ones. To my surprise, everyone around me followed each other down the road on the right, leaving the left one looking eerily vacant, despite the porch lights glowing and decorations present. My social anxiety hasn't always been the best. Coupled with me being a mother of a small child again, my mental resources felt burned out before they even had a chance. That's precisely why I veered off, pushing the stroller towards the start of the empty road to the left. The first house was unremarkable in decoration, save for a glowing pumpkin in the front window. However, the porch light was on, and according to the unwritten law of Halloween, you needn't have anything more than a lit porch and bag of candy to participate. So I rolled Mason up the front walk and unfastened him from his seat, holding his hand as I lifted him to ring the doorbell. Our little boy's excitement was almost palpable as he yelled, "Frick-or-freeds!" holding his candy bucket high as the front door began to creak. A soft mingling of baby powder and freshly baked cookies drifted into the air as the door opened, revealing the older woman inside. She smiled softly at my son, cooing about how adorable his costume was, before turning behind herself and grabbing his treat. A sequence of gnarled knuckles tightened around a plastic sack before dropping it into the bag. And just like that, we were on our way to the next house. I approached the lawn of the neighboring house warily, deciding to leave Mason in his stroller for this exchange. While I adored the motion-activated, mechanical werewolves in their yard, I wasn't sure my little guy would feel the same. An older man's voice rang out from beneath the barking of dogs. He stepped out onto his porch, closing his door behind him. But for the second it was open, it looked like there was one of the largest dogs I'd ever seen in my life. He dropped a handful of something into Mason's bucket before bidding us a good evening. I turned around in a hasty retreat before he could open the door to go back inside. Piercing melodic tones rang through the air as my Halloween theme song ringtone blared from my cell phone. Figuring there was a 99% chance it was my husband, I answered it without checking. And I was right. He was calling me to check in on us and apologize for still being at work. He promised he would be able to leave in the next 20 minutes to come and meet us. I was trying to tell him that we would most likely be done by then when the phone went completely dead. The third house was eye-catching in the most literal way. It was a white house with eyeballs projected all across the front in random formations. Mason emitted a squeal of giggles as we wandered up the paved walkway leading to the front door. A man in his 30s with a smile far too wide dropped a wax paper sack into the bucket, smiling at us until he was nearly out of sight. Houses 4 through 7 were much the same. People excited to be caught up in the Halloween spirit, albeit some of them a little odd. A tall house loomed at the end of the street. The last one. After this one final house, I could call Michael and tell him we were on our way home. A woman answered the door without a word. Not a hello, happy Halloween, go fuck yourself. Nothing. She stared at me with cold, dark eyes, her gaze unwavering. To be fair, I didn't say anything either. Maybe she was waiting on me to initiate? I cleared my throat lightly. Hi there, trick or treat? The statement came out as a question, though I couldn't explain to you why. Mason responded to my voice by reaching his hand towards the woman, breaking her from her icy fixation on staring me to death. A soft smile bloomed on her lips as she regarded him tenderly. It kind of bothered me, if I'm honest. Plenty of people have smiled at our little guy before, but the adoration glowing in her facial features was unsettling. She had a slight scar trailing up from her top lip, but it wasn't jarring. It seemed like something she was used to, like I'd seen it before. I should have done something. I was in control of our lives. Why did I have to go down that damn road? We would be most of the way home by now if we hadn't. How much candy did we really need anyway? Mason is still young enough to become hyper by sweets, and Michael was diagnosed with prediabetes almost 2 years ago. So, yeah, I should have done something. Only I didn't. I just stood there, blankly watching the two of them, my head swimming with questions and thoughts that ultimately would never matter. Mason darted inside of our house before I could stop him. My fingers grasped for the back of his costume only to feel open air. I closed the distance between us in between embarrassed apologies, scooping him up in this stranger's living room. Of course, he started crying immediately, which I was planning to also apologize for. However, the words died in my throat before they could be uttered. The woman had closed her front door, planting herself firmly in front of it. Her arms were crossed defensively, as if she was the one on the ass end of this awkward situation. I am so sorry about that, I said for what felt like the dozenth time. He usually doesn't do things like this. She only stared coldly in response. The longer I stood there, the more I got the feeling that this lady absolutely loathed me, like hated my guts. Though the reason why is somewhat unclear. She was younger than me, but her face held a sadness far beyond her earthly years. You can go. My son must stay. My blood quickened, causing my heart to pound in my ears and temples. A sickeningly sweet poison of acid crawled its way up my stomach and through my throat. I forced it back down with a heavy swallow before it reached the recesses of my mouth. Your son? I asked incredulously, hoping my voice didn't give away the panic attack that was quickly consuming my soul. I jerked the top of my jeans down on impulse, revealing the thick scar I received during my last C-section. He's my little boy. I gave birth to him. Not that it's any of your concern, but here's the damn scar to prove it. Now move out of my way and let me go." The scar, in fact, wasn't from Mason's birth. But how the hell would she ever know? Mason, completely oblivious to the tense and most likely threatening tone of the room, dumped out his entire candy bag on her coffee table. He then proceeded to sit down in front of all his treats, staring up at me defiantly, almost daring me to move him from the spot. Thoroughly and deeply unimpressed with the current treat in his hand, an apple, he threw it down on the table disgustedly. It bounced one time before rolling off the tabletop, hitting the corner on its descent to the floor below. I picked it up without thinking twice, only stopping to look down at it as a sharp, stabbing pain radiated through my fingers. It fell from my hand, trailing drops of blood with it. When it landed, a glint of silver was exposed that I hadn't seen before. Upon further inspection, I was more than horrified to recognize what it was. A razor blade. My eyes drifted back to the table, and I didn't know if I was more terrified by what I'd just found or the fact that we were still in this house. It was then that I noticed some of the other contents that were in my child's bag. My heart dropped as my son's tiny little hand reached for more. "Mason, no!" My voice came out louder and harsher than I intended, but it did the job. About a quarter of the unremarkable candy he had gotten was speckled with a rust red and golden fluid. I looked down at my hand, making sure it wasn't my own blood that I was seeing, but I hadn't moved it from my waist, where it was wrapped in the loose fabric at the end of my shirt. I followed the trail until it ended, right under a wax paper-like treat bag. The possibilities of what it could hold became more sinister by the second. My hands shook as I picked it up from the table, the paper rustling innocently as if it wasn't about to unearth the most terrifying thing possible. I peeked inside. A gag shuddered through my body as I recognized two bloodied, oozing human eyes disconnected from their sockets. There were too many terrible things for my brain to focus on for fight or flight to fully register in my system. I did my best to dull the adrenaline coursing through my senses, picked up Mason, his tricked treats left where they lay on the table, and made a beeline for the front door, all the while promising myself that if we could just get out of that front door and into our car, that I'd buy Mason an entire damn candy aisle if he wanted. The woman, all but forgotten until now, shot her hand out towards me, fingers wrapping tightly around my wrist as I grabbed for the doorknob. Then the world around me went white. I was taken back to a somewhat foreign scene, the familiarities of memory coming in slowly at first. It was a place I'd definitely been to before, but not for a long while. The pieces of the puzzle filling in with memories of my past. I saw myself wearing scrubs. I found myself fully conscious within my own body, yet powerless to intervene. A woman had come in, presenting with the middle stages of labor. Her face was dirty, with a scar jutting upward from her top lip. Her body seemed medically and nutritionally ill-prepared for the task it was about to undertake. She admitted through painful huffs that she hadn't been receiving prenatal care and that the father was completely ignorant to the pregnancy. The labor was intensive, but nothing out of the ordinary for what I assumed was a first-time delivery. In under 8 hours, she had given birth to the most beautiful baby boy that I had ever seen. I recognized the familiar sadness well up in my heart as I remembered that Michael and I only had daughters, and how I'd wanted a little boy since I was old enough to have children. That sadness melted before forging itself into hardened, steely determination. When she asked me to wheel her outside for a cigarette, a familiar hum of unease began to resonate through me, but I pushed it away. I chose to ignore it as I watched myself inject her with the contents of a vial that was in a patient's pocket at the beginning of the shift, a patient who had to be given Narcan to save his life. I don't know why I took it at the time, but the reason was later revealed to me with the pregnant patient. My stride was straight and confident as I helped Michael put her unconscious body in the back of his vehicle. My voice didn't falter as I explained to the night nurse that a woman had been seen earlier in the day that had given birth to a baby before fleeing the hospital with the child in tow. I was surprised at how convincing I was when I assured her that a report had been made with the proper authorities and asked her to keep me informed of any updates. I was even more surprised at how willing she was to dismiss the situation with no questions asked or concern shown, only gratitude that it wasn't her problem, since it didn't happen on her shift. I smiled while installing the hospital-issued infant seat in the back of my car, chuckling at how much the assembly had changed since our girls were babies. The new little life cooed along to my off-key singing as we drove to his new home, our home. A montage flashed of Michael and I changing diapers, buying formula, marveling at how fast he grew out of his baby clothes and all of the other things that the first couple of years of life involves. The next vision was one of the discarded woman waking up from a failed, ill-intended drug overdose. She was filled with a haze at first, then quickly wailing for her stolen child. I watched her get arrested, her appearance and behavior making her nothing more than an undesirable disturbance. I watched her be called a liar, a junkie, and a fraud before being sent to the mentally ill ward of the facility. Then I watched as a piece of her died each day, accompanying the realization that the only path to a normal life was one where she, along with the rest of the world, denied her child's existence. By the time I snapped to reality, Mason and her were hand in hand. He glared at me, his tiny face scrunched into menacing features, and I wondered if she had shown him the same things she showed me. "You can leave," she repeated. "My son stays." The front door flew open at her final word, whipping the leaves on the stoop into a furious frenzy of chaos. "Mason, come on, baby. Daddy's waiting for us at home," I said gently, holding my hand out towards him. Although it seems impossible, I swear his eyes flashed back as I was pushed out of the front door. My feet fumbled beneath me, barely able to keep up with the unseen force shoving into my back. "Mason!" I yelled, tears robbing my lungs of the urgency attempted in the word. Then I was outside, the night air biting into my face like tiny needles. My hands fumbled for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, to report what had happened. I knew the police wouldn't help me. If anything, they'd lock me up like they did Mason's mother. Sobs racked through my chest as I trudged the long walk back to my now childless vehicle. I dreaded looking into the back and seeing his little toddler seat there, cold and abandoned. However, that didn't happen. I was shocked to find the back of my car empty. Heartbreakingly enough, the house wasn't much different. It seemed like each and every trace of Mason had disappeared without a trace, scrubbed from my existence forever. It took me a while to convince Michael that I was telling the truth about what happened. He agonized for hours about how, in the back of his mind, he always knew this would happen. My husband and I rifled through the house for days, searching for anything left of our borrowed son. In the end, we were finally able to find one single photograph tucked into the mess of books on my husband's desk. It was from the day I brought Mason home from the hospital and Michael held him for the first time. But I noticed something I never had before. Michael and I were standing there, shining with pride as we regarded our perfect baby, one with round, black eyes.
Come on, Sienna, hurry up! I'm gonna get drenched if I stay out here.
Even with the threat of getting soaked in ice-cold rain, I did not want to get out of the car. I didn't even want to go out tonight. My plans were to play Baldur's Gate 3 and do absolutely fuck all else. But Poppy, bless her heart, did not accept my plans and just gave me the puppy dog eyes. I can't say no to my best friend, even if what we were doing was, in my humble opinion, dumb as hell. Don't get me wrong, I love Poppy. I've known her since we were babies. Literal, lifelong friendship. But where I was focused on what I could see and touch and verify as real, she had not, to put it lightly. When we were 13, she proudly announced she was now a Wiccan and could communicate with the goddess and the horned god. She dropped Wicca after about 3 months, but other things came and went during that time too. Crystal healing, pendulums, spells, witchcraft unrelated to Wicca, psychics, and of course, tarot cards. She was back on the tarot train this month. It doesn't bother me either way. It was what made her happy. I thought it was all bullcrap, but she'd never actually done something that would be harmful, like using amethyst to cure cancer or whatever. In return, she never pushed me to believe in the metaphysical. Never pushed, but she did invite me along to talk with her psychics. Sometimes you go along with your friends' plans that don't sound that fun just to spend time with them. And I had spent a lot of time in my apartment lately, so I agreed to this plan. Now, outside the house, I was having second thoughts. It wasn't like the house had a spooky vibe. It was a bit older, but it was in good condition. It was out in the middle of fucking nowhere, though. The nearest neighbor was a farmhouse probably a half-mile out, and there was nothing else out here but cornfields and small patches of woods.
Sienna, do I need to drag you out of there? Oh, I'm freezing.
No more delays. I took a deep breath and popped out of the car, immediately regretting my decision not to bring a coat. Poppy had brought her obnoxiously pink and red raincoat that somehow came in sizes for adults, but wherever the coat did not protect, she was soaking wet.
Come on!
She looped her arm in with mine and dragged me to the front gate. She quickly undid it before she pressed a finger to her lips.
Don't make too much noise. We don't want to set off the dog.
Even in the mostly dark, I could see it was well kept. A small garden was in front of the large bay window, and flowers surrounded the birch tree. I could see the doghouse. I could not see the dog until we were almost at the door. The only reason I saw it was because its eyes opened as we got to the door. Its fur was pitch black. Poppy quietly knocked, and we waited for a few moments before I saw someone behind the glass of the door. The woman who opened it was the last kind of person I could have expected. Most of the time Poppy dragged me to readings, the host was older, all gaudy jewelry and reeking of incense. The woman on the other side of the door was no older than us, wearing yellow, elbow-high rubber gloves, a green headband, and a rubber apron.
Oh, I lost track of time. I'm sorry, Poppy. I was busy cleaning.
The woman pushed a few strands of black hair back past her headbands.
Come on in. Make yourselves cozy in the reading room. But try to be quiet. Mother's asleep and I don't want her woken up. Oh, you must be her friend. I'm Vanessa. Please take your shoes off. I just cleaned the rugs this afternoon and I don't want them getting all wet.
I'm Sienna, I managed to say before Vanessa whisked herself away. I glanced over at Poppy, who was grinning ear to ear, and I finally understood why she insisted I meet her new tarot card reader. Are you serious?
She's your type.
Poppy giggled as she kicked her shoes off.
I mean, I don't know if she's gay, but she's got black hair. She's super neat.
Don't you start, Poppy, I threatened as I unlaced my boots. For real. Do not start. I had just ended a relationship. I was not eager to jump into another one, even if Poppy was. Poppy stuck her tongue out and then beckoned me into another room. This was a bit more what I expected. Comfy couches, a low table with a deck of tarot cards spread across it, statues of various gods and goddesses on the shelves along with crystal balls and long sheer curtains hanging over the doorways. The cat was a welcome change of pace, though. A tuxedo Maine Coon that was lounging in a fluffy bed. Poppy plopped down on one of the couches and I sat next to her. The cat looked unimpressed at our intrusion and just yawned before going back to sleep. Vanessa joined us in a few minutes, rubber gloves and apron discarded and carrying a teapot.
Thank you for being patient. I just got into a cleaning mood and before I knew it, you were at the door.
She laughed quietly before taking the couch across from us.
Do you want me to use your favorite deck, Poppy? And what deck would you prefer I use for you, Sienna?
Before Poppy could respond, I blurted out, I'm just here to be company. I don't believe in tarot. Poppy looked horrified at my bluntness, but Vanessa just quietly giggled as she poured 3 cups of tea.
Oh, I'm sorry for assuming. That's perfectly fine. The cards don't really work for people that don't have a bit of faith in them. Other than that, it's just for fun. You can pet Oreo while I do the reading for Poppy.
Meanwhile, Vanessa shuffled a deck of cards and started the reading. There was no pitch, no mystical wind-up. It was quite matter-of-fact how Vanessa went through it, more like a friend giving advice than calling on the powers of the universe to solve your problems.
I'm so glad you got that promotion at work. You really deserved it. Be mindful, though. Not everyone will have your best interests at heart. I know you're such a sweetheart, but just because that older guy in your department acts sweet and mentor-like, best give him a wide berth. He's not trustworthy. Is just going to hold you back. No, this isn't the time for boyfriend hunting. You really need to focus on yourself right now, and your career. Building a life with someone else is much easier when you've made a good foundation with yourself. You're only 23. There's no hurry.
I found myself back on the couch before I knew it, enjoying that mint tea Vanessa had poured for us. Poppy drank down her every word, eyes wide and occasionally nodding as Vanessa spoke. The reading ended with Vanessa patting Poppy on the shoulder.
Thanks for coming tonight. The rain's still coming down really hard. If you want to wait for it to peter out a bit, I'll get some cookies if you promise to still keep being quiet.
Can you do a reading for me? I didn't even mean to say it. It just popped out. Maybe it's because Vanessa's cute. Maybe because her reading style was genuinely more interesting to me. But now I wanted to see what she had to say about me. Poppy's jaw dropped, but Vanessa only slightly raised her eyebrows.
Well, if you'd like to. I'll choose the deck, though, if you're sure.
I nodded and watched as Vanessa pulled out a decently sized wooden box from underneath her couch. Inside were packs and packs of different tarot cards, some more traditional, some more goofy and fun. Vanessa traced her fingers over the packs before she selected one that was pale blue with minimalist pictures in gold filigree. Poppy gasped quietly.
Oh, I haven't seen that deck before,
she said.
It's a new one. You'll be the first I use it for, Sienna.
I don't know why that felt so flattering, but it did. Vanessa shuffled the deck, her face one of utmost concentration as the cards were mixed together. First card she set down was a little guy holding a pentacle.
So, this is definitely meant to be you. Good. That's a place I can work from. Is there any particular questions you want to ask?
I shook my head.
Then let's just see what advice the cards have for you today.
The second card she turned over, and I shit you not, was literally death. The little golden grim reaper was almost cute in this style, but I did burst out laughing. Seriously? I asked, cocking an eyebrow. Vanessa didn't seem insulted by my incredulity. She actually seemed to find it funny.
Seriously, this isn't a bad thing. Despite common superstition, this card doesn't talk about actual death. This is all about change. Change is a crucial part of our lives. If things don't change, we stagnate and rot. Just prepare yourself for it. Things end, but new things will begin.
She set the card down and went to pick up another one, but the card she picked accidentally took another one with it. The second card fell onto the table, turning so it was upside down. The Page of Swords.
Oh, that's interesting.
Vanessa set down the next card, 10 of Swords. She paused for a moment, pursing her lips as she clearly considered the meaning of those two.
I knew I was drawn to use this deck of cards for a reason. So I'm going to ask you, does the color blue and the time 11:11 have any significance for you?
Before I could answer, there was a screech of tires and a loud crash outside. I sprang to my feet and was going to head to the door when it slammed open. Vanessa visibly flinched and the color drained from her cheeks.
Oh no.
she whispered before also getting up.
You should go. This isn't going to end well.
Vanessa, you fucking bitch!
The woman who joined us was furious. Her face flushed crimson and each footstep taken was a stomp. Vanessa held up both her hands.
Please, Becky, quiet down. Mother is sleeping.
Shut up!
A nerve was now popping out in Becky's forehead.
I can't believe you. I'm one of your most loyal clients. I brought you so much business. And how do you repay me? You make my boyfriend dump me!
Vanessa swallowed, nervously lacing and unlacing her fingers again.
I didn't make him do anything, I swear. You need to be quiet. If you wake Mother up, she is going to be furious.
Yeah, you're just jealous I have a man and you're gonna be a lonely old cat lady your whole life!
Becky sneered at Vanessa, who just shrunk and looked like she wanted to be literally anywhere else. Becky stepped forward and raised her fist like she wanted to punch her.
Well, what are you going to do to make this right?
I had had more than enough of this chick. I stepped between her and Vanessa, holding up a hand. Hey, she doesn't owe you shit. She told you to shut up, so use your one brain to shut your mouth. Becky seemed to just notice I was even there, and the way she looked over me, she clearly didn't like the look of me. I was half expecting the next word to come out of her mouth to be something incredibly offensive when the loudest voice yet boomed through the house.
Who's making all that racket in my home?
I thought the source of the shout had to be stomping down the stairs, but when she turned the corner, I realized quite quickly that was just because this woman was an actual fucking giant. Standing well over 6 feet tall and with a broad build to match, the elderly woman's wrinkled face was undeniably crone-like, thinning white hair sticking out from her liver-spotted scalp and a large wart on one of her sunken cheeks. The image was finished off by the fact that she was wearing one of those old granny nightgowns, flowy and white with cornflowers printed on it. Vanessa audibly gulped.
Mother, I'm sorry. I was just doing a reading for these two when Rebecca came barging in. She was just leaving.
Becky snapped out of her shock of Mother's sudden appearance.
I am not! I'm not leaving until you call my boyfriend and tell him your reading was bogus!
Mother snorted like a hog and crossed the room in a few strides. Now towering over Becky, she tilted her head to the side, and I couldn't help but be reminded of a hawk looking down at a mouse.
You mean that reading she gave to that skinny wimp a few days ago? Oh no, it was a good one. She told that he needed to dump your venomous ass on the curb with the rest of the garbage.
Vanessa looked horrified.
I didn't say that,
she yelped.
I'm paraphrasing.
Mother smirked down at Becky, and I got a glimpse of a golden tooth in her predatory grin.
You're a nasty, selfish bitch who makes everyone around her worse. I can only think of one use for you.
Becky's jaw hung lower and lower at each of Mother's hurled insults.
How dare you!
Mother's hands clamped around her neck before Becky could finish her sentence. I froze. I couldn't scream, run, or try to help free Becky. I just stood there as Mother's hands squeezed tight. Becky's eyes popped wide open, and she clawed uselessly at Mother's arms. The hag just continued to smirk. I don't know exactly when the elderly woman started growing. I do remember feeling small in her presence, but it wasn't until Mother's head brushed the ceiling that my brain caught up to what I was seeing. The elderly woman had sprouted over 2 more feet in height. It was insane. It was so fucking insane, and I still didn't do a thing. Not even when I saw Mother's nails stab into Becky's neck, each claw-like finger now dripping blood. I don't know how long she strangled Becky. It felt like hours. But Becky's gasps and gurgles became quiet. Her struggling grew weaker and slower, and finally she went limp, her face a shade of purple I'd never seen in a human. Mother finally let go of Becky, and she fell to the ground with a smack. Not even a twitch. Becky was dead. The room was dead quiet while Mother examined her claws. Genuine claws, not just sharp nails, and sighed, wiping them off on her nightgown. Her beady, black eyes turned to me. I had to be next. I was so screwed.
Well, the body's just gonna go to waste if we stand around. Time to get to work.
Poppy had also frozen, but that sentence was what kicked her instincts back into drive. She screamed and ran for it. Unfortunately, her path took her right by Mother, and in a blur of movement, the giant hag had backhanded Poppy hard enough to send her sprawling on the floor.
Vanessa, dear, put the scaredy cat in the back room.
Huh? What? No!
No, don't pout. I'm not gonna kill her, too. Just lock her in until I decide what she can be good for. Well, don't just stand there, other girl. Grab the bitch and drag her into the kitchen.
I couldn't believe what she was saying, let alone what I did next. I did exactly what I was told to do. I hooked my arms underneath the corpse's armpits and dragged her along, following the chuckling crone as we left the reading room. I heard Poppy asking what we were doing. We needed to get out of there. We needed to call the cops. But I let her voice fade into the background of white noise in my skull. The kitchen was nothing out of the ordinary, save for the giant butcher slab that was up against the right wall. Mother nodded to the slab.
Get her up there.
It was not a request. It was an order. It was a struggle lifting the body entirely off the ground, but with a bit of shoving and a loud smack, Becky's corpse was now lying on the butcher block. Mother gave me a long look up and down before grinning proudly.
Good girl. What's your name?
Sienna? I took a nervous step back. What are you going to do with her?
What do you think I'm going to do?
Mother snorted again.
Give you a proper reading, that's what I'm going to do. Oh, those cards are cute little gimmicks, and my darling Vanessa can use them efficiently as one can. But she needs to grow up. Tarot cards are child's play. Anthropomancy, now that's how you get real knowledge of things unknown. Depending on the results, I might try some osteomancy as well, we'll see.
Those words meant absolutely nothing to me. Even when Mother shredded Becky's bright blue tank top off her body and pulled a large knife off a rack, I didn't get it. Not until she plunged that knife into Becky's gut and sliced her open. Her innards slipped free, flopping onto the ground with a sickening splat. I stared in horror as Mother stared at them, murmuring quietly to herself as she saw something I couldn't even possibly comprehend. The room was quiet, save for the sound of more of Becky's intestines sliding out. Finally, Mother grunted before slamming the body back down on the slab.
We're quite alike, you and I.
She said so matter-of-factly, I almost burst out laughing. It was so absurd how calm she was now, compared to her fiery rage when she'd first been woken up.
You don't take other people's word for it. You need proof. No blind faith for you. I like that.
I swallowed and tried to avoid breathing in through my nose. The smell of blood was about to bowl me over. You like that, I repeated.
Yes.
Now Mother took a different blade and with the finesse of a butcher started carving up Becky. Slabs of meat were laid to the side while some prime cuts were literally thrown across the room into an open pot.
Well, the reading was clear. I shouldn't let you get away.
My heart nearly stopped out of fear when Mother looked up. She was now splattered with blood, which, paired with her granny nightgown, somehow made her more terrifying. She threw her head back and shrieked with laughter.
Not like that, girl. Oh, you're too much potential to just have for dinner.
Mother proceeded to crack open Becky's ribs with her bare hands. She pulled free and held up the woman's heart.
Yes, that potential. The readings are clear. Some people think you have to have your head in the clouds to make magic work. That's not true. You need to be grounded. You need to be calm.
What makes you think I'm any of those things? I blurted out. Mother grinned.
You're not running away, are you? You helped carry this bitch to the table and stayed for your reading, didn't you? Oh, girl, you are something special.
Mother hurled her fist back and threw the heart into the pot.
Put the lid on. We'll be having a late dinner tonight.
She croaked. I needed to stop. I needed to get out, now. There were other knives in reach. I could get a weapon. I could defend myself. But instead, I crossed the room and, doing my best not to look into the pot, I popped the lid on. The moment I did that, the stove clicked on, small flames flickering underneath the pot. I turned and I hated how I was shocked by how fast Mother was carving up the body. The kind of speed that only came with experience. This wasn't Mother's first time butchering a human body. She pulled the ribs free, and then with a shout, she threw them across the floor.
Right, so here's what the bones advise.
Mother said as she continued to carve up Becky.
Don't quit your day job yet. You're gonna need the savings. Next month, we'll be starting your training. Few years, you could actually be an all-right witch.
I don't want to kill people, I said.
Good. Then you won't fuck me over by getting caught red-handed.
Mother waggled her blood-soaked fingers in the air and cackled.
Teaching the bloodthirsty is a great way to end up having to flee a mob. I should know.
Vanessa poked her head into the kitchen and sighed as she looked down at the bones on the floor.
Mother, you really should put down a tarp first. I'm going to have to mop again,
she said, with the same amount of frustration one would have if someone walked on clean floors with dirty shoes. Mother scoffed.
Don't tell me how to throw the bones, brat! Is that Poppy girl locked up?
Yes, Mother. I gave her some tea to help calm her.
Good, good. Now, pick out a nice wine to pair with dinner.
Mother shooed Vanessa away, the other woman avoiding eye contact with me as she headed down into a cellar. She sighed.
Oh, my sweet dear Vanessa. I picked her too. I'm very good at picking witches.
I don't want to be a witch, I said.
You don't want to be a witch that relies on good vibes and listens to all that do no harm bull,
Mother said, as if she knew my complaints were half-hearted.
You want to have control of your life. Your fate is ready to be taken. It's just a reach away. I can give you that, Sienna. Now go set the table. The plates are in that cupboard there. Set 3 plates. I don't think Poppy's going to have an appetite. Once you're done, you can have a break.
I obeyed her again. It wasn't like I didn't have a choice. I wasn't being mind-controlled. I just did what I was told. The plates were fine china, but the silverware had handles that felt like bone. I finally plopped down in one of the chairs and just stopped thinking for a while. I usually tended to lean towards overthinking, but right now I was just blank. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do when I heard Mother shout that dinner was ready. Numbly, I dragged myself out of the chair and headed for the stove. I flinched when I took off the lid, but when the steam cleared, what I saw was a proper-looking pot roast with potatoes and carrots. The meat didn't smell quite like beef, but it did smell delicious. My mouth watered, and that almost made me be sick into the pot. I put the lid back on.
Don't drag your feet, lazy girl. Get the pot to the table. It's already past 11.
Past 11? No fucking way. We'd not come that late in the evening, had we? I glanced up at the clock to confirm Mother wasn't pulling my leg. Vanessa finally reappeared, cradling the bottle of wine.
Do you like red wine?
She asked me quietly. I'm more of a vodka drinker, I admitted as I picked up the pot. That got a bit of a smile out of Vanessa, one that had just a hint of the darkness that Mother had in her smirks.
Oh, you're gonna fit in here just fine, Sienna.
The table set, Mother dished out our portions of the roast and passed out bread rolls.
When you share a meal, you're establishing a relationship. We're beginning something beautiful here, Sienna. Control of your future.
I stared down at my plate. Did I want this? Did I want to dive deeper down this rabbit hole? Did I want to finally have a bit of control over my life? I picked up my knife and fork and slowly cut a small piece of the meat. I brought it to my lips, hesitated for just a moment, and I took a bite.
When there was a chillin' here and there were more jack-o'-lanterns and plain pumpkins on every doorstep, I got called out to investigate a fresh crime scene. Somebody thought it would be real cute to firebomb a Catholic church. Now, this wasn't one of those boxy, smaller, modern churches that you could level with a few Molotovs. No, sir. This was one of those ancient, cathedral-grade churches with high ceilings and priceless paintings of angels with titties and peepees flying around. I suppose it's shocking enough that someone chose to target a piece of history like that, but even more shocking was that the way that the blaze had gotten so intense. Every fire truck we had at hand was there, and the fire just wouldn't quit. All that water and all those brave firefighters got for their efforts was a lot of steam. It was days before the scene was cool enough to walk on. There was molten rock. The heat was so intense that some of the masonry melted, and there hadn't been any explosions, just the fire. There were a few hundred people inside when the deed was done. It was some kind of late-night worship thing, and the arsonist chose that it wouldn't be enough to just destroy the building. There had to be some lives lost as well. Forensics could only turn up one small bone fragment. The rest of the bodies had basically been cremated on site. Like those bodies, there wasn't much of a church left. Had any more damage been done, there might not have been any evidence that a giant church had even been there. So they were desperate to get some kind of lead on what was used, let alone what kind of person would do such a thing. That's why they got me out there to dig around. I could feel the heat on the ground through my shoes. I didn't know what they expected me to find just digging around in all the ashes. Well, I found the first domino in a sequence of many. It was a footprint. There were lots of those with all the law enforcement and rubberneckers about, but this footprint kind of stood out. It was made in the mud. If the crime scene hadn't been a church, I might not have paid it so much mind. The sole of the shoe that had left the imprint was of a pentagram, and not just any 5-pointed star. This was the kind shaped like the head of a goat with a strange symbol at the end of each point. Not exactly the kind of shoe you'd seen on the shelf at Foot Locker. It was either a very limited run, or it was custom made. The next domino was the slender, brownish-purple leaf that was lying in the footprint. That leaf would have meant nothing to anyone else but me. 'Cause you see, well, I'd been banging the chief of police's wife for months. She and her husband and her 2 kids, they all lived on this really ritzy lakefront property. There was one park by the lake that was like the Garden of Eden. The trees and flowers were so thick that they felt like walls that kept her and me a secret, sheltered us. Most rich white people are afraid to be out at night, no matter where they live, so once the sun went down, we had that park to ourselves. Well, we could pretty much do whatever we wanted. There was one sort of flowering shrub in that park that overpowered everything. The smell stayed in your clothes and your hair. Very suddenly, that police chief transferred out and put his house up on the market. Either it happened suddenly, or she just decided not to tell me about it, which was merciful when I think about it. But just like that, she was gone. Hurt more than I thought it would. The closest thing to love I ever felt, even though that's not what it was. And that scent, that shrub, that was all I had to remember her by. I got all sentimental and tried to find that shrub to keep at home. There wasn't a single nursery or greenhouse or nothing that carried it or could get it in. I kept my eyes and nose open for that shrub when I was out on the job. I swear it grew nowhere else in town except that park on the lakeshore. And there was one of the leaves, lying there, and the only clue I'd had found all day. I couldn't turn a blind eye to it. After a quick nip from the flask, I gathered myself to go pay a visit to the lakeshore. It had been a few months since I'd been there. I don't know if the vodka buffered me from the nostalgia or made it worse, but as soon as I smelled those flowering shrubs, I pretty much forgot I was there on official business. It was like I was in a trance as I walked down the path paved with concrete that had been fancied up to look like cobblestone. There could have been a mountain of evidence in front of me, a dead body or something, and I wouldn't have seen it. I missed her. I wondered if she missed me. Stuck with a man with plenty of money but no brains. Not even enough to know that his own wife was stepping out on him. Speaking of steps, there was the tread of that infernal sneaker imprinted on the brick path in dry mud. Pentagram, goat's head and all. The trail led to what? The Shrine of the Virgin Mary? It was just about the biggest and most extravagant shrine to the girl I'd ever seen. Says something about the money that's in the property on that end of town. Either this culprit was really burning the candle from both ends, or... The shrine was surrounded by extremely thick greenery and shrubs. Yes, those shrubs. I took a deep breath like I was about to jump into a pool on the deep end and got down on all fours and pushed my way into the foliage that was starting to turn colors. I found that the ground at the base of the shrine had been disturbed recently. Somebody had no clue how to cover their tracks. It didn't take much to find the cavity in the earth where the ground ended, and the shrine began. It was a simple, waterproof duffel bag wedged in there. It could have been my imagination, but I swear that bag felt a little warm. I looked it over. Something about it told me that it hadn't been sitting long. I threw my eyes around to make sure I was alone, and I unzipped it. The shoes were the very first thing I saw. I kind of felt them and saw them both. If the footprint was blatantly evil-looking, the shoes were something else entirely. They were black with red accents. Oh, and never mind the shiny metal pentagram hanging from one of the shoelaces. I turned it over, and what did I see but the very sole that had been left with the footprint at the scene of the crime. I was thrilled to have made the discovery on my first hunch, but I was also disappointed that it had been so easy. So, sue me, I like a little bit of a challenge. This character just fell into my paws without a fight. But then again, who else would have recognized the foliage from that shrub? Leave it to a sinner to incriminate the devil. I thoughtlessly started to trace the diabolical patterns on the bottom of the shoe. I burned my finger and I dropped the shoe. I couldn't believe it to the point that I had to do it again. That time I tried a finger. I didn't think I'd use much. Happened again. I felt inside the bag for anything that was warm, anything that could give me a rational explanation for what I was experiencing. And nope, the shoe was hot. So I put my hand inside the shoe. Nothing. That's when I did one of the dumbest things I think I ever did. I took off my shoes and proceeded to put the evidence on my own feet. I'd thought they might be a size too small, but when I got them on, they fit great. Maybe they're stretched or something. The shoes had a few metal accents, beside the dominant pentagram that proudly hung in the middle of the shoe. I thought about putting on some latex gloves to inspect further, but I was already wearing both of the infernal things on my feet. My DNA was going to be in there no matter how I went about it. I started running my fingers along every part of the shoes like a blind man, trying to read every little bit of information. And I found nothing. Not until I touched one of the metal pentagrams. The shine looked genuine, like they could have been a low-carat gold. I lifted it up to see how the light bounced off of it, but the little thing was so sharp that it nicked me. Oh! I'd already barely touched it. How razor sharp was that thing? The cut spilled a few warm beads onto the metal. I didn't want my DNA on it like that. I thought my eyes must be playing tricks on me because it looked like the blood was soaked into the metal. I tilted my foot a bit, looking for the shine of my blood creeping under the metal symbol. But no, the shoe was dry. The pentagram drank my blood. I got a bad feeling about the whole thing. and I went to untie the shoelaces. The knot wouldn't budge. I tried the little kid method and got a grip on the shoe with both hands and pulled. The shoe's hold on my foot was sure. Same went for the other shoe. I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. The devil had a death grip on my feet or something. But then I noticed something. The shoe that drank my blood, the metal of the pentagram, had turned a coppery red color, like my blood had mixed in with the metal. The other one still had that light gold color, and that foot started to get warm. I got the message all too quick. No way, I said. I didn't like that. It even got warmer. Okay, Jesus. I touched the other pentagram and my skin cut all too easy, like I was an old man. The metal drank deep and turned that copper color, and then my foot stopped burning. Okay, you got what you want. Now what? Let me go now? I didn't stop to think if it would be a good or a bad idea to directly address a pair of evil shoes, 'cause they listened. Or something was listening. I watched as my shadow underneath me got darker. 2 long shadows, like tentacles, writhed out from underneath me, and then snaked across the ground and up and around the shrine to the Virgin Mary. Now, this particular representation of Mary looked like she could have been the daughter of Marilyn Monroe. The hair was blonde, and the rags looked expensive, and I swear she was wearing some kind of lipstick. They'd stuck to tradition in one detail. Her eyes were closed. Well, they opened. They were like 2 embers. The expensive, weatherproof paint began to peel away, and the gray stone underneath was laid bare. The statue of Mary grinned at me. She had sharp teeth. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but she never did. Her mouth kept opening, kept widening. Her chin sank further and further past her breasts, down past her waist, down to her feet. Next thing I knew, that statue's mouth had become so wide, it was as wide and tall as me, and it was filled with a shivering crimson light. A doorway. The frickin' thing had stretched into a doorway, or a portal of some kind. Sounds, awful sounds, drifted out of it. Cries, screams, wailing, misery, human misery. Somewhere in the mix was laughter and howling. I thought it was thunder at first, but thunder don't laugh. My mind was racing. I ran my hands along the aperture of the stretched-out mouth of the Virgin Mary that formed that twisted portal. It was a little too warm to rest my hand on. It was solid. A wave of heat hit me in the face, and I had to step back, tears rushing up to rescue my seared eyes. I snapped back to the moment when I heard crazy laughter that was coming closer. I got my revolver out, cocked the hammer, and backed up good and far from Our Lady's gaping mouth. It was a kid, maybe early 20s. He was sweating buckets. His face was blackened with soot and ash. Madness shone in his eyes and his yellow teeth. He was wearing something that looked an awful lot like the robe, or whatever it was in the bag I found. He was also wearing those sneakers. Their metal pentagrams were glowing like molten rock. His whole shape was twitching with the jerky movements of a squirrel. "Marcus," he said in a voice that oozed instability, "is that you?" I wasn't sure if I should answer or not. "We've been waiting for you and the new recruit for a long time, Marcus. We're getting tired of waiting. We might have to haze you along with him." Acting on instinct, I reached into the duffel bag and pulled out the robe and tucked it under my arm. "Oh, sorry to keep you waiting," I said, stepping forward. Kid jumped like a crackhead hearing a police siren. "It's okay. Marcus is indisposed at the moment. I'm on my own for this round." He looked me up and down, did some kind of mental calculation, and apparently arrived at an answer that made sense to him. "Well then, are you ready to burn a church with the very fires of hell?" he said, salivating. "Oh, is that what's on the itinerary?" "Marcus should have told you." Orientation was cut short. He said you'd guide me the rest of the way. Marcus usually isn't that sloppy. How do I know you're telling me the truth? I got the portal open, didn't I? Okay, fine. Make sure you have all your hell pellets. He must have read the confusion on my face because he patted the pocket of his robe. I took that as my cue to put on the thing I was carrying. Like the shoes, it didn't seem like it should fit, but it did, as if by magic. I reached into my pockets and found some things that felt like heavy metal balls, like musket shot or ball bearings. I pulled out what I expected to see, something that looked like a round lump of lead. It smoked where it made contact with my skin. My new friend nodded and said, "Okay, let's go." And he went into Mary's mouth, practically skipping along the way, whistling. I took a deep breath and followed. If I'd been swallowed alive by a gigantic snake with a thorny throat, that's the closest thing I could compare walking down that corridor. Blood-red light lit the far end, which seemed to be an eternity away. But we reached the end, and I found myself inside a cavern of porous rock where everything was jagged and spiky and rough. There was a group of more kids in robes. They each had a set of these evil sneakers poking out from under their clothes. The volcanic rock, or whatever it was, had formed a natural platform from which one of them stood and prepared to hold a meeting. Every last one of them were kids, but they were also kids that had seen 40 miles of bad road. They were all missing teeth and had lines on their faces that had no place in the face of anyone under 50. The one on stage had eyes that never stopped looking like he was shocked, and he surveyed the room like a bug-eyed fish. "Where's Marcus?" he said. He wasn't able to make it, but he sent in the latest recruit, said my new associate, as he gestured to me. The shift in the room was solid enough to be a billy club. They all looked at me, this hulking aged specimen that was solely out of place. "Don't you think you're getting started a little late in life?" one of them said. Even in the red-tinted light of that chamber, I could tell that the face of the kid on the platform had turned colors. "You dare mock the choice of Marcus, my second in command?" Before the kid could say he was sorry and that he'd never do it again, the others seized him, took his robe and his shoes. He must have known what that meant because he howled like a monkey. He was then dragged to one of the exits of the cavern, where there was more light, hinting at an open area. "You are excommunicated," the kid on the platform said. Just as soon as the orange light fell on him from that opening, all manner of claws and tentacles were on him, and the meat was stripped from his bones before the ushers had let go of him. It was a wonder they weren't injured along with him. I must have been transfixed because I was startled when the kid on stage was suddenly next to me, taking me by the elbow. "Welcome to your new family, child," he said. Dang, that kid looked high. I'm guessing the robes and the shoes are more than just uniforms, eh? "Indeed, child, indeed. The robes caused the minions of darkness to turn a blind eye. And the shoes, well, those are new. Yeah, I haven't seen anything like them until recent. Brand new shoes, child, brand new shoes. They're the first of their kind. They were invented by one of our top officers who's infiltrated the popular music scene." A popular musician is a disciple of the devil, huh? Most of them claim to be, but only a handful are the real thing. But oh yes, he performed a foul new ritual of his own design and transmuted the body of a glutton into those wonderful shoes. They can open the gates of hell, and they can open the gates out of hell. How do you know it was the body of a glutton? There were 666 pairs of shoes, made from just one body. Ah, I see. So this night, child, this night, you prove your worthiness of wearing your shoes. With the hell pellets you have in your pocket, you're going to start a fire at a church that cannot be put out. I took out one of those balls and held it up. "You mean one of these?" The kid nodded vigorously. I looked for a target to test it on. There was this ugly cube of some kind, and I thought it was as good a mark as any. But when I drew my arm back for the toss, the little leader guy nearly messed himself. "Don't do that. You must not defile the Dark Altar." "The what?" "The Dark Altar. It's the means by which Hell has granted us safe passage through the realm. The robes and the shoes are an extension of its power." "Hey. So if the altar's defiled, all Hell turns on you?" "Precisely." "That sounds like a living nightmare." "Absolutely." I opened my robe and immediately started peeing on the altar. And I hooked up a big grayish-green loogie and spat on it, just for good measure. Monstrous, bestial roars and squeals filled the cavern. I zipped up my fly and began running back the way I came. The conduit, or whatever, that took me down into Hell was still open. I heard the sound of my brethren getting butchered behind me. I was one step ahead of them, and I made it out. I erupted out of the portal like a cannonball, and I nearly plowed over a kid. It appeared that the original user of the shoes and the other accoutrements that went with them had decided to come back for his gear. He was mostly what I'd expected, a kid of about 14 or 15. Like the others, he looked much older. His mouth dropped open when he saw me, exposing all 3 of his teeth. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed him by the hair. "Nice to meet you. I'm from Hell," I said as I grabbed him by his long, scraggly hair. "No, you're not. I'm from Hell," he protested. I didn't expect this. He just might have been dumb enough to give me some useful information. "No, I'm the one wearing the devil's shoes." "They're my devil's shoes. You stole them from me. I'm the real disciple of the devil." "Oh, yeah? Prove it." I threw him down on the ground. His lower jaw protruded, and his sparse teeth looked like angry little fingernails. "I used fire from Hell to burn down a church. Then I used the shoes to escape into Hell itself. And that's the confession I've been waiting for. I got enough now to put you away in a place where you'll wish you had a portal to Hell," I said, just a little too loud. He got that "oh crap" look on his face. "Oh, yeah? Well, I know all about you and the chief of police's wife." "I don't know what you're talking about." I bluffed. "The devil does. He's the one that set you up for temptation. So if you take me down, I'm taking you down. Neener, neener, neener." I dug my fingernails deep in his scalp and held him up like a prized trout. I looked him up and down, and I took a deep breath. "All right. I suppose that not every situation calls for following the exact letter of the law. There's got to be room for alternate methods of resolution." His painful scowl melted into something relaxing and smug. I dragged him over to his robe, and I reached into one of the pockets and I pulled out one of the cubes. It smoked gently where it made contact with my skin. "That's some bouillon you got there," I said. He didn't see the humor in the statement. "So here's how it's going to be. You're going to go your way, and I'm going to go mine, after I get rid of all the evidence." I dropped the cube onto the grass, where it immediately turned into a puddle of churning magma that began burrowing into the ground and forming a pool. "Hey, those shoes won't burn." "I know," I said. I yanked him up into the air, and I caught him by the ankles. With that swift movement, I had him hanging upside down. I lowered him down into the hellfire head first. Once his head was burned, his body stopped twisting and squirming, and destroying the rest of the evidence was much easier. I dropped the last of his toes in the liquid fire, and I took a moment to regard the shoes that allowed a living man to walk through Hell. There was no point in adding them to the fire. Nothing could burn them. Same could be said for the other stuff. In a few months' time, I was known as the detective that was always one step ahead of the city scum. Some of them called me the Phantom, since no matter where they tried to go, I was there waiting for them. No matter what shortcuts they knew or how fast their getaway was, I was there. How? Simple. I had the fastest shortcut of all. All I had to do was wear those infernal shoes inside of my Wellingtons, so's to hide the treads, and just like that, I had the best bus pass in town.
One. In some strange way, I suppose it was appropriate that Nicholas passed so near Halloween. He loved the dressing up and scaring friends, going to spook houses nightly for the week ahead, and then staying out all night the night of. It was the only time I remember him having any type of darkness inside him. It was a happy darkness, but it differed from all of us others. Throughout the rest of the year and the opening of the next, he mirrored us, the rest of the siblings. But Halloween, that was his time of the year. The leaves falling, the colder and wet chill that hung in the air at night, the goosebumps he could give us as he told haunted stories just far enough away from the streetlight that it made the fear more evident, more plausible. Many times, I wanted to lift my body vertical and run like hell towards the front porch of our old and tired home. But it was that. It was home. Some of our friends lived in houses, parents always busy doing selfish things, but our father had given us himself as part of the package of the home. Even though I was different, not from the same blood, I was family held in the same order of Pop's love. It had been a hard time when we lost him. Not that far back. But that's another story for another time. Nicholas was the oldest. He loved music, and while one couldn't call him a musical master, your heart would be drawn into whatever he played and sang. He had taught us all silly old songs like Froggy Went A-Courtin' and others that seemed to have been born from a time far before his time. But he loved them. You could see it in his expressions his face wore as he played and sang. I knew the news hadn't held the time to truly sink into my psyche. I was in shock and barely believed it was true. Our mom was devastated, unable to conceive he was really gone. She cried and looked up at me with lost eyes, and I melted. I felt her pain. I knew she loved Nicholas with endless love. I also knew she held the very same love for each of us. We all attempted to give her comfort, but it only seemed to take hold temporarily. She would smile when we shared happy memories, but almost immediately the powerful pain of loss would overtake any memory no matter how happy it had been at the time. Her dementia didn't help. She would seem to understand one moment, until the next erased the previous and took her back to zero. I saw a patience in my brothers and sister like I'd never knew existed. All the years of our past were quickly flooding through all of our memories. After all, our ages were scattered and spread about. We had all mostly moved away, starting our own lives and families many years ago, only meeting at holidays for most of us. It's of course to be expected, no matter how much one wants the past to remain the same. It was usually a pleasant time to get together and meet. But this one was a great failure at that attempt. You can't sit around the bonfire and share memories of growing up in quite the same way when the gathering has brought the family back together to share such a horrible loss. With Mom having entered a new stage in her life, her 89 years had ushered in a permanent loss mental awareness, condemning her to a sentence of never totally being able to grasp the intricacies of what life was bringing around us. She was living with Janie, our only sister, and the youngest of the rest of us. Her husband had welcomed both of her parents to live next door to them when age overtook their ability to maintain the 20 acres of timber outside a town too far from the kids to regularly travel to check on them. The move had been very tumultuous the 10 years prior to now. Wounds opened between family members, but now long healed. Life with family who love each other. Make it possible to bridge differences and scab over reckless scratches that nick the skin. 3 days until Halloween. Plans for saying goodbye to a man like Nicholas should stand out, especially when it came so near a time of the year he loved so much. And he was a man now. If truth be acknowledged, he was an old man. Janie, being the youngest of the bunch, was 52, Brian 54, Sam 56, Max was 58, and Stephen, or Skeezix as he was known, had just turned 63. He was now the oldest of the brood, now that Nicholas had just turned 67 on the 15th of October, his favorite month, had passed. From all the different places the siblings now lived, enjoying their trailing years in life with kids of their own, had come from as far as Alaska, Georgia, and different spots of Missouri to meet and gather their collective grief to send Nicholas's body and soul off for that final journey and reminisce of their shared pasts along with their accompanying spouses and grown and nearly grown children. Skeezix and his wife Mallory had brought their young granddaughter Solara, a little angel in her own right who does her very honest best to bring happiness to the mix of memories and sorrow and loss. 2. Janie and her brothers sat around their mother's living room making their first mutual attempt at collecting thoughts of how to properly send off Nicholas. "It can't just be church and black clothing. Nicholas would hate this," Janie spoke. "Hate it? Hell, he'd haunt every one of us for doing that to him," Skeezix replied. "Can I say one thing?" Max quietly asked. "The timber," he said in almost a broken whisper, the speaking it aloud almost bringing instant tears. The siblings almost answered in a harmonious and unanimous answer, "Perfect." Brian spoke out and in a most logical tone almost shattered the others' collective smiles at the entire thought of the idea. After all, none of them had stepped foot on the sacred land for 10 years. What if the owners say no? "They surely wouldn't. I mean, we wouldn't be there long or leave a mess or—" Janie sniffled, lifting the hanky that had been held in her hand, dabbing her eyes almost constantly since getting the saddening news. "I'll make the call to them and ask if that's okay," Max replied in almost the same hushed tone as when he had spoke those 2 words, "the timber," that none of us had heard from his lips or any of the others for so long. It was as if they had become taboo, not allowing that memory to re-enter any of our minds other than quiet and personal thoughts up to this point. There was no longer a dry eye in the room. The siblings' spouses were also affected by the soft but resounding term the family's land had been known as since ever. Max made a few calls before getting the owner's number, before quietly standing up and moving to the other room as he punched the numbers in and drew the phone to his ear. The rest of the room hushed their discussions in an attempt to hear hints of what was being discussed. Shocked eyes from the one-sided dialogue quickly gave the answer to those hints at the conversation. "But no, it's not like that at all, sir. We wouldn't be destructive of the property at all. We just want the family to be allowed to access the riverfront from what used to." "Hold on, Mrs. Wilkie. That's not necessary to use that kind of language. We just want to be able to gather our family and spread the ashes along the river. Please." His head lifted from the kitchen as he looked out across the space between him and us. His eyes glistened with moisture mixed with redness. No one was certain the flush red color was from sadness or building anger. The answer became shockingly evident mere seconds later. "Well, you can just kiss my hillbilly ass, you piece of worthless—" Max stuttered before pulling the phone away from his ear and staring at the screen before sealing his wonder if he had been hung up on. "You asked!" The others all looked at each other, realizing that indeed, the answer was obviously a resounding no. "You tried, Max, and we thank you for that. It would have been perfect. Nicholas would have loved it." Sam looked up with the only smile in the room. "Ah, this is perfect." "What in hell do you mean, Sam?" Janie asked. "This is perfectly awful," she finished. "I agree," Brian added. "I think I'm seeing something totally different from your thoughts, guys. Sam appears to have another way of getting around this, challenging problem." Skeezix's smile mirrored Sam's. I'm seeing the wheels turning inside the head of the retired military man he is. I see another covert mission being cooked up. Skizik's grin continued to grow. Sam turned and winked at Skizix. Affirmative, Skizix. You are indeed correct. Operation Hallow Send-Off is already simmering. Give me some time to knock out the logistics. This mission isn't scrubbed just yet. Who is game to come with and run a quick late-night recon of the area? All of the remaining siblings' hands begin to rise in a volunteering stretch to the sky with following sounds of me and I, as the outstretched arms remained stiff in the air while the spouse's eyes showed anxious worries fused with unwavering support. Promise to be careful, Kate, Brian's wife, called out. Yes, guys, we don't want this turned into a twofer at the end of a shotgun, Mallory echoed, her husband Skizix smiling wide. Janie spoke up quickly. So, what time are we heading to Operation Hallow Send-Off? Oh no, Mrs. Janie dear. I'll go, you're not. You sit this one out and stay with Mama C, Brock said to his wife. I'm going, Janie retorted. We're all going, Janie, when the mission is laid out. This is just a reconnaissance mission to prepare the actual Hallow Send-Off. And I mean all of us. Mama C, too. Just how in hell's that gonna work? Questioned Brian. By thorough planning, Brian. I've been through tougher missions. Nicholas is getting this send-off with all of us present and accounted for, Sam said with an evil grin. 3. The sun dropped behind the trees as Sam drove the truck north towards the small town of Ash Grove. Skizix sat in the front passenger seat while Brock, Max, and Brian sat squeezed in the back seat of the crew cab. Brock leaned up and excitedly spoke. This is some crazy shit. I've never done anything like this before. Sam smiled. This is nothing. You should have been with me in the sandbox. That was some crazy shit. You never knew what you were going to encounter. Brian leaned up beside Brock. Nick would love seeing us all together like this. It's the one thing he hated, us spread out all over the place and not talking. Exactly, Skizix replied as he turned, stretching his arm around Brian's shoulder. I'd like to think this was all in his plan and he's now enjoying seeing this. Of course, he would have loved to actually be here too. A small tear crept from his eye. Max just sat watching the scenery blur into the distance from the window. It was like he was in another world of his own. He looked down and scrolled through his phone. His fingers pushed a couple of buttons, and then his gaze moved back to quietly staring out through the glass of the window. It wasn't but seconds before the sound of guitar strings being strummed began filling the cab of the truck. It was a recording of Nick. All conversation that had been going on ceased at once. The tune was melancholy and echoed through the air with a sense of magic, as if he were sitting beside them playing his favorite guitar. Suddenly, there wasn't a dry eye in the vehicle, and then his voice softly began singing. It's all one can do to get along in this crazy world. His words quietly faded as the strings of the guitar plucked out a small solo along with the rhythm. Sing the song, come on, sing along, drown out this mad world and make it right. When the music stopped, it took several minutes for the brothers to regain their senses. Max looked up. I heard him play this song while we were sitting down by the Sack, the place we all played in the river as kids. I secretly recorded this. He would have stopped playing had he known. Max smiled. I'll never forget this day. I'll never forget this song. I'll never forget Nick. The river is where he needs to be. It's gonna happen, Max, I promise, on Halloween night, just like he'd want, Sam replied. The truck pulled slowly across the old cement bridge just downriver from the spot. The sun was just beginning to hover over the cusp of the horizon, glimmering through the limbs of the trees lining the fields. A calm washed over the brothers sitting in the truck's cab. The entrance to the timber, the old homestead that was no longer the family's, seemed quiet. Sam did notice some faint blue lights up in a tree looking beside the entrance. A camera, he thought to himself. Damn the technology. He continued slowly passing the entrance. Everything looked so much different now. He glanced up into the rearview mirror to his two brothers in the back and then over to the passenger seat. This may be a bit tougher than I thought. The new owners are from California, aren't they? He asked. Yep. One of the offshoots of LA, I believe. I remember them telling Pop that they had sold their ordinary ranch-style house for 3 times what he was asking for this place, and his Cali home only sat on a small lot, Skeezix stated. Sam quickly replied, Yeah, I'm afraid in their big city paranoia that they may have cameras everywhere throughout the property. What's that mean, Sam? We gonna have scrub the mission? Brian asked. We ain't scrubbing the fucking mission, Brian. Nick is getting his send-off from the timber down the sack, Max quickly answered. We aren't walking away, guys. Just means we need to come in from upstream or across the river from John's Chapel side, Sam stated. Plans have to be fluid and able to change flow and direction. We just met our first change. Don't freak. Sam pulled the truck into the neighbor's drive and to the right to talk over other ways to proceed. 4. The brothers pulled back into their sister's driveway, and no sooner than the truck rolled to a stop, Janie was out the door and down the porch steps to greet them. Well, did you figure a plan out? We have, Max said as he eyed the other boys. We're going to go upstream from John's Chapel with a couple of flat-bottom boats. We'll put in at Shane's Gap where Doug will leave us the boats. He wants to come. I think he should. He was really close to Nick, like family. I agree. He was like another brother to Nick. He knows the area better than any of us. Grew up here all his life, Janie said. Janie, Max started. Craziest thing. We saw gigging lights floating down the river. Janie looked over. What's crazy about that? We all liked gigging. The whole damned area likes gigging. Little late in the season, ain't it? Max questioned. You have been away for a long minute, haven't you? Janie smiled. It ain't just about the fish or frogs. You know that. In unison, as if it were a well-practiced response, Janie and the other boys all said in unison, It's about fun and family. They all smiled, but then all fell silent in the same moment. The somberness took the place of the now stolen smiles. Janie was the first to fall apart. Nick left family in the river, and I miss him. Max, who was usually more withdrawn than his siblings, quickly moved in and took Janie into his arms. I miss him too, sis. We all do. Just like we all miss Pop. All the brothers encircled Janie and Max, joining in a family hug. Sam was the first to speak up. We only have 2 days to get this send-off of Nick's put together. We have to figure out how to get Mom there and our kids. This can't turn into a nightmare. This is, after all, our oldest brother was sending off. We have to do this right. Pop is watching over us. There were all the arrangements that needed to be made, like the cremation, the vessel to hold Nick's ashes, sharing any ashes with family members who felt they needed to hold on to some small part of Nick for comfort. There was music, the eulogy, just a million things it seemed that needed done before Halloween. Nick was such a big part of their blended family that it just felt like perfection for this oddly different Halloween. Needed to be flawless. There would be no ghouls this year. No children holding out bags for candy while dressed like goblins, clowns, astronauts, or soldiers. No vampires or ghosts. It would be family saying goodbye instead of the standard evening filled with smiles and trick or treat being timidly spoken by toddler princesses or boldly by superheroes like Batman or Wonder Woman. The entire scenario still seemed surreal and unbelievable. The entire family was in shock, especially their mom. Her psyche was suffering, her memory struggling to even comprehend what had happened. The same questions and statements repeated as if the memory banks of it all were too full to hold anymore. Is Nick gone? She would ask. Did he die? Where was I? Was I with him? She would look up in the saddest confusion. It broke all of their hearts to have to give the same answers over and over. Answers that were not the ones she wanted or needed to hear to satisfy her feeling of confusion. It was as if there were a scratch embedded in the vinyl of the recorded album, forcing the same audible things to be repeated infinitely on a loop. The entire family resembled a brokenness in different ways. Most were functioning, taking the place they needed to fill to get the mission accomplished, but the truth was, it was difficult for even the toughest of the clan. The family didn't need any more loss. Recuperation and time. That was what everyone needed. Poor Solara, the youngest of the family, Skizik's and Mallory's granddaughter, flitted between sadness and the love of seeing family members she hadn't seen since last Christmas. The simple truth was, Nick was gone. He was up with Pop, and certainly the two were looking down on them, wishing things could be much different than they were. 5. It was here, late afternoon of October 31st, a day that normally brings excitement and costume final touches, impatiently waiting for the sun to take its dip into the horizon as children practiced their scares and smeared their face paint into scary green witches and psycho blood-smeared clowns, glitter-soaked perfect princesses, and bandage-wrapped mummies. Instead, Janie and her brothers were putting Nick's ashes into the case of his favorite Gibson Les Paul Jr., a guitar he loved to make music with. The siblings placed mementos of things they knew Nick loved, last-minute goodbyes on tiny sheets of paper that they hoped in some way he would be able to acknowledge their memories of good times shared and the pain they would now feel. Promises to keep them in their hearts and minds. Objects like a flashlight, because Nick had an almost hoarder's conscience of needing 20 of them if he had one. They shared more painful smiles between them as they closed the lid for the last time. They knew Nick understood, even though he would hate the feelings he was giving them by his leaving them. It wasn't by choice. If able, he would have stayed until the last one leaving, closing the door quietly behind him before turning the lights out. But that isn't the way life played this act out. The oldest had been the first to leave, a plan which is likely the way it's supposed to play out, but didn't seem right this time. Mom was loaded in the truck and waiting, all the siblings, spouses, and their kids too. A rather large troop in 5 vehicles. The procession wouldn't play out like a normal one. No police or funeral home escort leading the way. No hearse with a long box in the back. Just a Gibson guitar case that weighed more than normal and rattled with loose items within. Somber faces painted the windows as they took off in a line, but that was the only scene of normality in this last parade to being sent off. No grave, no graveside service, no normal pastor giving any sermons of how God's plan was being painfully played out like the final act of life. This was Halloween after all. The streets were not filled with sad faces waving goodbye as the line of vehicles made the drive carefully through the neighborhoods. The sidewalks were lined with costumed kids carrying pillowcases and plastic pumpkins. Sparkles of candy and fun filled their eyes, while tears filled the eyes sealed inside the vehicles slowly passing them. One confused face of a beautiful little girl sitting by the window, watching through the glass at all the spooks holding hands of their normally dressed parents, peered out in wonder. The drive was periodically silent, no one knowing how to speak out when tightly packed next to others likely feeling the same imprisoned silence. Occasional sniffs and deep-taken breaths followed by quiet sighs. Nick would have hated this part too. He would have wanted to be on the outside with all the dressed-up children begging candy from house to house, popping out from the bushes, scaring friends of his. No, Halloween would never be the same. Never again. 6. After pulling out of town and the parades of kids in outfits filling the front yards and sidewalks, the darkness began to swallow up the interior of the vehicles traveling down the highway on their way to their destination. Max had gathered the group together to explain the mission and the necessity for moving quietly to the boats and while floating down the river to their destination. The riverfront of the Timber, a place that on this night they were not being welcomed. None of them understood why in the world Larry or Wilma Wilkie would have acted like they had when asked about sending Nick off at that particular site on the river, the place Nick had grown up with them playing, adventuring, and learning about life. But they had, so they must be very quiet, since they would be illegally trespassing on property that was once owned by their family for many generations. The thought that haunted Pop when he was forced to be the one to let the property leave their family. It had been a source of family disagreement since his last time he had set foot on the property. They had all knew he felt as if he were a failure on his part, even though it hadn't been. At 80 years old, no one could expect someone to be able to take care of a house, several barns, and all the property. All the kids had grown families in places far off. The tradition of sticking around the family property and carrying on had been the failure of not passing the land down. It was on the kids, not Pop. No one planned on moving back, their lives built on different lands in different places. The siblings had all agreed the Wilkies family with their 3 young children were the perfect family to sell the property to. They would be the new torch holders to carry on their traditions. But now it felt totally different. Sure, they had been wonderful when Pop died shortly after becoming the new owners. They had let us come back and send him off in a similar way. But now there was something different. They had been anything but kind upon being called. But traditions should be carried out, one way or the other. The Wilkies had made the only choice possible for Nick's send-off. A covert way spun into a very clandestine mission in order to send their oldest and very loved brother off to the next level. The best way they knew how, come hell or high water. 7. Sam pulled up to John's chapel. He exited the truck. He looked the part of the military man he was. Black khakis, black pullover shirt, black grease or paint smeared over his entire face. Nothing but the whites of his eyes peeking through the darkness of this hallowed eve. In truth, Sam's attire looked like a military Halloween costume, and it made every one of his siblings nervous as hell. He looked entirely too much the part of a covert squadron leader on a mission over in Iraq. It brought the seriousness of their mission to each one of them involved, even 9-year-old Solara. The view of Sam brought a sudden silence to each one of the family. He had told them how moving quietly until they were finished and clear of the war zone was necessary. None of them had taken him seriously, not until he stepped from the truck, his eyes shining out from the darkness like a walking zombie's. This was happening, and it was no game. It was all of their final goodbyes to a valued family member, Nick, a brother who shouldn't be the ashes inside that Fender guitar case. The flat-bottom boats were exactly where Doug had said they would be. There was nothing but faint water splashes in the dark as each person quietly loaded themselves into one of the vessels. The brothers each helped load their boat and then collected together to retrieve Mom and carry her over, attending to her, helping assure her confusion that swallowed her from the day she was told what happened. She now sat in the front seat, not fully aware of why she was there or exactly what was happening around her. She looked around, searching the faces of those who surrounded her. Her eyes hollow and drooping from the anguish she couldn't understand. Sam stood on the bank as the last person was placed aboard the rocking metal vessels. All eyes instinctively searched his, somehow acknowledging that he had last-minute instruction on how the dark full moon Hallows evening would play out. He wiped his eye with his finger that was cloaked in a black glove. "First off, I love each and every one of you." His smile barely shone through the darkness. "I hate the reason we are here. I know you too share those same feelings. Nick was Nick. No one will ever be able to replace him. The world is so much less the place it was 3 days ago. He will be missed. I'll never forget him. I wouldn't be who I turned out to be without knowing him. Skeezix, Steve, you and Nick were never a stepbrother to me. You were flesh and blood from day one. You both were anchors in my life, teachers. He paused and then smiled. Not always teachers of the things we needed to learn, but loved teachers nonetheless. Brothers through and through. Pop felt the same way. Mom, he said as he looked over directly at her, thank you for falling in love with our dad. And he did love you with all his heart. If it weren't for that shared love, I wouldn't have learned and loved the way I was taught, through you and Nick and Steve. He sniffed. It was a side of Sam that his siblings had rarely, if ever, witnessed. Sam's melancholy tone changed instantly into his military voice as if a switch were flicked. We need to all be silent as we quietly paddle downriver. I'll lead and we'll beach and exit at Joe's property. From there, we will walk quietly in a single file line. There will be 2 barbed wire fences we will breach before holding up and gathering on the far side of the second wire. Max, you and Skeezix will aid Mom. Brian, you are in charge of Nick's remains. Mallory, it's of utmost importance that you make sure Solara is quiet. Are we all clear? He finished in question. There were nods barely seen from everyone. Let's move out. This was a first mission for most everyone in the family. Brian waited until all exited from his boat before he reached for the handle of the guitar case. It rattled as he gripped the handle and lifted it, turning it from flat to upright. He glanced up, acknowledging the sound, and then nodding. As Sam began to lead, he ran into the first orb weaver spider web. He gently brushed the web and spider from his head. He looked back to make sure everyone else remained quiet. A small whisper from Solara to Mallory was the only sounds heard. Grandma, are there spiders out here? She asked. Your Uncle Sam will clear the way of any in our path. I'll make sure you don't run into any webs, I promise. Solara tugged on her grandma's shirt again. I told you, Solara, I'll not let any spiders get in your path. Mallory quietly spoke. Grandma, it's not that. Look behind us. There's lights on the river. Mallory turned and looked behind them. She suddenly stopped. It caused everyone in line to bump into the one in front. Sam turned to see what was going on amidst the ranks. What's causing those lights to float on the water? It looks like a car or something, Solara asked. The line stopped, each person hearing what Solara questioned and turned to peer behind. The heads turned in delayed unison, much like a line of dominoes spilling one after the other after the first one being tipped into the second. The 2 tiny lights did indeed appear like headlamps on an auto. They moved very slowly as they appeared to hover above the river's surface, silent and steady. A splash from the water could occasionally be heard, much like the sound of a spearhead being launched through the surface like someone gigging for fish. The line stood quietly watching as the beams of light moved closer and closer. Is it Pop, Grandma? I thought he was, passed. No, sweet pea, it can't be your great-grandpa. It may be a neighbor out fishing. There were quiet breaths of feared anticipation as the glimmering lights moved closer and closer. Would they be seen from the outer glow of the lights when the boat passed? Closer and closer, it silently approached. Just as the lights were about to become even with the line of quiet family members, the tiny spider dropped onto Solara's head, causing her to burst out with a shrill scream. The sound of Halloween echoing across the water and bouncing up into the trees in reverberation. Gasps from the others rang out in hushed silence as the lights eerily floated past without a sound. There was no boat below the lights. There was nothing that could be seen as it passed. No sound but the continued occasional splash of the water surface being breached. What the fuck? Slipped from Skeezix's lips before he could catch the words and reel them silently back in. Did you see that shit? Or not see that shit? He finished in question. Solara was busy shaking her entire body, attempting to knock whatever landed on her head off. All other eyes watched in quiet, frightful question as they watched the halo of the two lights hover on past them, seemingly not noticing or paying any attention to the scream of a child nor the line of frightened people at a near-silent standstill, eyes statuesque, as if glued to the river, the pull of a magnetic force leaving them powerless to do anything but watch in disbelief. Even Sam, the experienced army machine, unable to force words past his lips to hush his niece or offer phrases of comfort to his stunned virgin troops, as the glow slowly disappeared in the distance as it became dimmer and dimmer, the splashes dissipating into the silence of the full moon's glow, bouncing off the slow-moving rapids over the shallow rock bottom near the timber. Coyotes out in the distance cried to each other as if they were searching for a lost pup in darkness. One would holler and another would answer. The night became suddenly bitter with a cold breeze, feeling as if the night of the Halloween's dead were now waking and walking the fields to the east and the woods across the river. It felt as if they were walking towards the river down the trails cut through the woods, still likely kept manicured, as if Pop were still there to caretake them, keeping them clear of fallen limbs and weeds. Janie spoke quietly. "I'm not sure this was such a great idea." Sam answered, "This is exactly what I would expect Pop and Nick to help make happen. They're up there laughing their asses off at us." He paused. "It's about time to cross a river." Max looked up to the moon and judged by its position that it must be about 8 o'clock. "It's still early and we're basically running on time, barring any more surprises." He nervously smiled. He turned and faced his family. "Another 50 yards or so and we'll quietly ford the river. It's almost November. The water is going to be chilly. Just saying. Let's get moving again." He turned and began pushing through the brush as silent as a bear moving through the forest. Sam was definitely built for this kind of activity. With his darkened, grease-painted face, his eyes appeared the same as the light beams floating down the river, absent of any vessel carrying them. Just the white light invisible of anything except their roundness glowing in the dark. 8. The boys, and later Janie, had practically been raised at the timber. When Pop's father, Popper, was alive, he would take them down and they would all stay in sleeping bags in the tin shack, a garage that had doubled as Popper's living quarters. Popper bounced back and forth between town, Springfield, where his sweet wife Nanny lived, and the timber. This was the place he loved. He loved bringing his son with him too. Pop had grown up much like his boys, enjoying the outdoors and playing in the stream of the Sac and the Fork, where the Little Sac met up near the old cement bridge. It was a time the kids all loved and expected to live the life forever in the world of the timber. Memories were made that weathered the time of growing up and moving off. Pop's kids grew their own families and spread out to distances across the country, scattered miles and miles from the memories made. Arrowheads from Indian tribes found in the plowed dirt of Popper's gardens. Copperhead snakes ambushed as the large limb left lying under the old rusted Lincoln's hood was lifted up to catch them basking under it, heated by the sun shining down. Skeezicks proudly wore a straw cowboy hat for years that Pop had wrapped a skinned and dried copperhead skin around its brim. Targets placed at distances that grew as all of their shots from various rifles and handguns became more accurate through practice. Tree houses built out in the large trees throughout the acreage. Forts that kept them protected from the Indians they imagined were certainly hiding in wait to capture and scalp them. Kids who had the freedom to roam that most of all their friends weren't lucky enough to own. The best friends of each, who were fortunate enough to have parents that would place their children's trust with Mom and Pop to come with us and share in our adventures. Nick had been the one who had the most difficult time blending into the mixed family. Old enough to grow resentment in another man attempting to father him when his biological father lived too far away in a world that he and Skeezicks no longer fit. Nick was 14 and had been the man of Mom's house. He saw Pop as the adult stealing his ability to be the man of the house. Skeezix, 10 years old and desperate for a father figure to be in his life. The 3 new stepbrothers all looked up to Skeezix, who before they came along was just the youngest with no responsibilities. Chaos was bound to happen at times when one world breaks and another is found and formed from another, slamming together into one. The timber helped it all meld together. Nick eventually accepted and grew to also love Pop. He also learned to love the land like the rest of us, finding it to be the sanctuary it was. Yes, this was the proper place to send him to his new world, the next level, just as it had been the proper place to spread Pop's ashes down the river he loved so much. Nick's death was yet another way, like Pop's, to bring our family that was scattered hundreds of miles from each other together once more. A painful way to get that done, and not a way any of them would ask for. But the collateral gift from such a heartfelt thing did have that one silver lining hidden within. The fact it was only less than a year after Pop's death, and tonight being Halloween, gave the whole affair a twist that would likely stay fresh in all the minds of each attendee forever. Even Mom's, whose memory was becoming a struggle to keep. All of these thoughts mingled together in Skeezix's mind as the frigidness of the Sac River numbed his feet and legs as he waded across, his eyes focused on the once familiar gravel shoreline he had grown up enjoying. He and his siblings skipped flat rocks in competitions of who could float their rock the farthest across as each attempted to count the jumps it made, leaving multiple growing rings on the smooth surface of the water. Catching crawdads, and once getting hold of their bodies, avoiding their pincers grabbing hold, chasing Janie around the shore as she screamed in feigned fear, knowing we would never actually let them latch onto her. Changing our minds about swimming for the day as we watched the serpent snake its way across the water towards us in curiosity, chasing us from its territory until the next day when its scaled body was no longer the focus of our memory. Cutting grapevine into cigarette-sized sticks and smoking them, puffing out rings of smoke into the air and watching them grow as they rose up into the sky, believing they would rise enough to become part of the puffy clouds above. These were memories that would never leave us, shared memories. Nick would now become one of the memories that would be bittersweet but encased in their forevers. Skeezix had told Mallory his wishes when his end came. His ashes were to be scattered across the rocky shoreline of Kaina Point in Oahu, Hawaii. But tonight he wanted to add to those wishes. He would tell her he wanted part of his ashes to be scattered down the river like Pop and Nick's. 9. Doug and Pastor Jim were the only outsiders invited to attend. Doug because he was such a good friend of the family, and Pastor Jim because he had at one time been Nick's mentor of faith. He had drawn Nick away from his wild and drug-induced days of rebellious youth, the last of the hippie days. A funny memory popped into Skeezix's head of a discussion he had shared at the park where the family met for a picnic before the funeral today. He talked about the marijuana tree, a tree that everyone had known as the mark spot of the hippie movement of Springfield and met at back in the 70s. They had gathered in tents and had a sit-in by the largest and oldest tree, smoking pot and holding signs of peace and love. Solara had overheard the conversation and inquisitively asked her grandpa about it. "Grandpa, will you tell me about the marijuana tree?" Skeezix's wife and his sister-in-law Katie giggled at her asking her grandpa about the marijuana tree. The two women quickly broke into what seemed like a well-practiced song. The two immediately harmonized. "Grandpa, please tell me about the marijuana tree. Won't you please?" The entire family-filled picnic table broke into unanimous laughter. It had to be planned because someone caught it on video and it quickly became a reel on Facebook. It was the one thing that broke the sadness of the occasion for the picnic. Pastor John began the service. Mom was seated in a lawn chair that Brian's wife had carried from the boat. The family all circled around the guitar case, all in reverent silence other than the sound of sniffs and sighs that would be expected. Friends, and of course family, this day is not the usual kind of Halloween that one is used to attending. While we are all sad of the loss that brings this unusual hallowed eve, we do acknowledge that Nicholas Lawrence Saint will always remain in our hearts. His time here on Earth didn't seem to be long enough to quench our thirst of his presence, but he had greater plans for him by our Creator that needed to be filled. He will be missed and remain loved and remembered for all the kindness and love he shared. As the pastor's words were spoken, the leaves in the trees began to rustle from the winds that began picking up. It was almost as if the surrounding world of the timber were speaking out in the only way they could. The appearance of the mysterious lights on the river upon their entering the loved grounds that would likely never be able to be explained or understood, to the quiet but oddly strong wind that suddenly encircled them, seemed understood by all to be the spirits the loved ones lost, conjured up from the wishes of the unknown souls that likely somehow still resided within its perimeters, sent to remind each of those gathered that Nick was not entirely gone from their lives. Once the pastor's words were complete, each sibling stated a short message to the brother they lost before Max lifted the guitar case and led his brothers and sisters to follow him towards the water's edge. Janie held a candle that was scented of coffee, a drink Nick loved to partake of hot or cold. It never seemed to matter how long it had sat near him. She lit it, and the aroma quickly blew around the huddled family, as if directed to encase them with its smell of being fresh brewed. The brothers all stood holding the guitar case as they gently placed it on the Sac River's surface, holding it until Janie placed the candle on its lid. Mom's pained cries echoed above all the others as her oldest son's ashes within its vessel was gently released to flow down the river until gravity would eventually pull its water-soaked tomb into its depths. The flicker of the candle's flame was like a beacon disappearing into the night as they all watched through blurred eyes. As the siblings stood in quiet reverence, the family on the sidelines all drew a deep breath as their eyes suddenly lit up from a pair of lights floating towards them from behind those standing in the water. Before the brothers and sister could turn to see what the rest of the family took notice of, a bright halo of lights passed through them on its way, following the disappearing glimmer of the candle as it was slowly swallowed up by the river. No words spoken, no ghouls or goblins seen. No new owners had stormed the temporary sanctuary of the saints' hallowed and loved grounds of the timber. The full moon silently slipped out from behind the puffy clouds that had temporarily hidden it from sight. The lonely howl of a wolf in the distance was the last sound heard as the Saint family and friends began to gather their thoughts and commenced the trip back to the boats to complete their Halloween funeral for Nicholas Lawrence Saint. The unknown glow of light slowly hovered down the river's surface until it too was swallowed up by the darkness of the night. We did it. Nick is in your hands, Pop. Happy Halloween. I guess we'll meet here at the timber again at some point. Sam spoke quietly as a tear slipped down his cheek and dropped into the river as he pushed the boat back towards the river's center.
Chilling tales for dark nights.